We're pleased to have you all with us, and a special welcome to our host, the Georgia Independent School Association. If you wish to follow on Twitter, you may do so with the hashtag #CrisisCoach. Firestorm does have a Facebook site, Firestorm Solutions, as well as our website, firestorm.com. All participants today are on mute. If you have questions, you may use the question facility built in to GoToWebinar, and we will either answer them during the webinar or most likely we'll probably do follow-up after the webinar. Firestorm transforms crisis into value. It empowers you to make and manage risks and crises. Our attorneys make us do a disclaimer here. This presentation is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion. Work products provided by Firestorm must be read in conjunction with local guidance by your attorneys and your counsel. This comments and advice given today should not be interpreted as legal advice or legal opinion. Georgia Independent School District School Association is our co-host today, and we present the Crisis Coach webinar series. This will be a monthly webinar series. Today we're discussing emergency preparedness, an overview, and an introduction. Next time it will be how we plan. Be sure to watch future webinars. We will be posting past webinars on our website. Our moderator today is Candy Lau, and Candy is the Vice President for Programs at the Georgia Independent School Association. And Candy, would you like to tell us a little bit about the association and how you're involved here?
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this very important and informative webinar. GISA would like to thank Jim Satterfield and his great staff at Firestorm for today's presentation. Firestorm is a GISA Gold sponsor, and they have already assisted one of our member schools as they dealt with what could have been a difficult situation. We are very happy to have you here today and look forward to the oncoming webinars that they will be presenting in the future. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending this with us, and we hope to see you at the conference in November the 4th. Thank you.
Thanks, Candy. And if there are requests from everyone on other topics you'd like to hear, please feel free to share that with us, and we'll be responsive and add those into the series as they continue. I'm Jim Satterfield. I'm the president and founder of Firestorm, and we're certainly glad to have everyone here today. We start each of the webinars suicide. She was being bullied by other students within the school, and that led to the very tragic death. We've seen the arrest by the sheriff there of the other girls that were involved in the episode, and this really triggers a whole series of things that we need to be thinking about in our schools with Facebook and bullying. There are over 2 million episodes of bullying annually in the United States, and it's a topic that should be a significant concern to all of us today as we go through. Facebook has made some changes, but the general feeling is that those changes won't, in fact, protect them. So just by going private, that's not going to be sufficient in this environment that we find ourselves in today. And later this year, we'll do a session specifically geared toward this topic. Our hurricane season has been lower than expected. We had one storm on the East Coast. There's currently one on the West Coast at this point in time coming in. The lower than expected is extremely good. However, it leads to apathy. And so there's concerns about hurricane season next year and individuals following and carrying through. We all awoke today with stories about the shootings from last week. From yesterday in Nevada, a middle school shooting, quote, a nice kid, but the bullying again, was one of the big concerns associated with that. Austin, Texas, we had a student post a Facebook warning that he was about to commit suicide, and then carried forward with his warning that he posted. Again, sources of information and understanding what's going on in our schools become absolutely critical. We had an explosion at UC Berkeley due to theft of copper wire. As we go forward, the economic climate presenting a great deal of difficulties at schools around the country. So today we're going to talk about predict, plan, perform. That's the process that we use to help each other as we build plans in these areas. Predict, which would be what would be occurring, what are the threats, what are the vulnerabilities, what are the risks that we face, what are those impacts that are going to be on our schools, how do we monitor for them, and what are the triggers that activate our plans. All of our plans generally fall under the word crisis. It could be emergency plans, could be continuity of operations, communicable illness, workplace violence. All of these elements come together in the planning cycle. And then under perform would be the training, the exercising, the supplies that we need to have in place, the monitoring that needs to occur, and then finally the crisis management. So the webinar series that we have, it really gears toward that. There are 5 common failures that we find in every school and in every business. First is failure to control critical supply chains. Have you identified who your critical suppliers are, and are they prepared to be able to support your school when you need them? Training your employees for events that occur at school, as well as your students, as well as helping them have plans at home. Most of the studies that have been conducted have shown that if there's a problem in an area, employees will take care of their family first before they focus on their job. Third is the failure to identify and monitor all threats and risks. We look at the obvious, the severe winter weather or the tornadoes, or if we're on the coast, the hurricanes that might occur. But what about communicable illness? What about workplace violence? What about the social media risks that we've just talked about this morning? Fourth is failure to conduct exercises and update plans. If you don't test your plans, you don't know that they, in fact, are going to work. So this is more than just a lockdown, a lockout, or a shelter-in-place approach, and looking at a wide range of those exposures. And then finally, a crisis communications plan. How are we going to communicate with each one of our stakeholder groups before, during, and after an event? Those become extremely important as we move forward. So are our students safe? That's the question that the parents are asking you in your school. What's the potential for your school to suffer harm? So as we think about that, we identified that second greatest risk as the failure to identify and monitor all threats and risks. While some risks may not be yet identified, are you monitoring for the risks that you specifically see emerging? So as we go and we talk about today identification of risk, you start out doing a vulnerability threat assessment, looking at what could go wrong. Look at the impact associated with it versus the certainty. Those items that are low to medium impact, that's normal operation. That's not the type of focus when we think about this type of planning that we need to look at. What we're concerned about here are those things that are potentially medium to high impact. Those are ones that you really have to have a plan in place. And there's some forms which we'll step you through, and we can give you copies so that you can do this exercise at your school. For those of you who attended the workshop in Macon a few weeks ago, we're going to talk about some of those same elements, and it'll be interesting to see what questions you have as we move forward. So if you're doing a vulnerability analysis, it should combine 3 things. 1, a site assessment. 2nd, interviews with the key players within your school. And then 3rd, a document review. Now, we'll go through each of these aspects and share some thoughts with you on what you need to look for as you see each one of the elements explained. We'll start with a site assessment. When you look at your property, access control is going to be the primary element that we want to look at. Do you have the ability to lock all your external doors? Are they locked during the school day? Do your classrooms lock from the inside? A key factor associated with it. Look at the physical security elements that are around. Are there gates at your school? Is there fencing? The building structures themselves. The geography of the land. Are there woods near your property and access control? The topography. Is there an area where someone would be harder to be seen? How close are you to the fire department and the police department? And having them come and be a part of your campus to be aware of the events beforehand. And then what type of monitoring and surveillance equipment do you have? Do you have cameras? Are you monitoring with a simple weather radio about storm threats that could be coming together? So we're looking at your property and your physical location in this type of an assessment. You can do a walkthrough with your local police department. I'm sure they would be glad to come to your campus and do a walk with you through the process. Certainly that's an engagement that Firestorm does on a regular basis. Now, the vulnerability analysis is a combination. It's a combination of looking at what you have in writing and what your plans are, as well as doing interviews associated with it. The interviews come in a variety of different ways, looking at hiring and discipline types of issues. We all followed the story last year of the Episcopal School in Jacksonville, where there was a termination of a teacher who went home, got a rifle, came back to school, shot the headmaster, and committed suicide. So looking at how you deal with those types of practices become very important. I won't list and read through every one of the messages that are listed here below that you should look at. I do want to touch on visitor policies, in that you need to be aware of who is on your campus at any given time. And that's one of the primary control aspects that you would go through. So looking at all of these areas would be very, very important. One common mistake we find with documents is they tell us what to do, but they don't tell us how to do it. And we'll explore that more in our webinar next month, explaining the difference between those two as we go forward. I also would encourage, if you do not have an anonymous reporting capability, that'd be a great addition for your school and something that you need to consider to add. So those are the elements that we look at if you're doing a vulnerability threat assessment for your campus: the site inspection, the interviews, and the document reviews. But now, when we think about it, let's think about, are all threats really equal? Do we put a different weight on, or a different evaluation associated with each of them? Now, this is a hazard impact matrix, and you can create your own version of this with what's the exposures within your particular school. I'd like to direct you along the blue section at the top of the slide, where it says you start out with looking at what's the probability that it would occur. How quickly does it happen? That's the onset speed. The forewarning, is it sufficient that you get the alert? For example, with a hurricane, we have a lot of forewarning. Duration, is it going to last a long time or a short time? The intensity, high or low? And then looking at the human impacts, the property impacts, the business impacts, to come up with a total weighting. And then you do a multiplication of the numbers across, and that gives you the relative risk factor. So those risks that score very high, you would want to be thinking about and focused on. But also those risks that score low, we don't want to ignore them within it. And this is a great exercise for you to have with your staff as you start to build it through. We're going to share some more insights about this particular approach in just a few minutes. So when you think about the United States, there are 4 zones that we want to focus on as you do your planning and going through. Your first zone is the national zone. What is it that could impact the entire country at one time? An example of that might be a communicable illness, a pandemic. We had the threat a few years ago of the swine flu. That's something you would follow on a national basis that could affect everyone at one time. Now, when we move from that national zone, we think about the second zone, and that's more the region that you find yourself in. And when we think about a region, we're thinking about a town or a county or a city area. What could happen within that? Well, we could have a terrorism event. We might have floods. Could have an explosion that would come together. There could be an ice storm here in Georgia. We have those on a regular basis in the winter. What would affect our region that would have an impact on us? So Zone 1 is the nation. Zone 2 would be our region. Then moving away from the region, we think more physically where we're located, and that would be the neighborhood around our school. That's within a 3-mile radius. I recommend that you drive that radius and the streets that are within it to know what's in your neighborhood. Chemical spills, biological threats, gas leaks. Are there warehouses near you? Are those areas that, what's stored in them? Could that be a particular exposure? Are there areas of crime within a 3-mile radius of your school as you do those planning elements? And then last, we think about the physical address where you're located. That is the 4th zone. And as you think about that address, I would encourage you to think about what's to the left of your property, what's to the right, what's in front, and what's behind. Those could have a direct impact on your school. And it'd be things that could happen within your building. A fire is a great example of that. It could be a workplace violence episode, as we saw at the Spark School that happened yesterday. So think about those types of areas as you do your planning. Think about all the risks, all the exposures spread across those 4 different zones as you do your planning. Now, when we think specifically about schools, we come up with a different kind of a list than we would find in a traditional business environment. And you'll see these are much more oriented toward the children in our school, things that you might want to be identifying and being concerned about as they would go forward. Your list may include additional items that aren't on this particular list. But again, it's a good opportunity for you to have a discussion with your staff and start to figure where would these come together and where should we be concerned at our school in our area. Now, we take these risks, and we showed you the hazard matrix form earlier so you can start to weight the potential of these to occur, and then you want to map them out. And this matrix that's created goes back and picks up those words, impact and certainty, and starts to break them down into other terms. And I'll explain the rare to highly probable and the insignificant up to catastrophic in just a few minutes. But if you would plot where each one of the threats on the previous slide fall, it'll give you an idea of the prioritization and emphasis that you need to place within your school as you think of these types of events occurring. Those that are in that upper right-hand quarter, those that are in those 6 red boxes, would be those that are very high impact, significant to catastrophic, and those that are highly probable. Those would be the ones that you would really want to focus on. Next, the orange boxes that are adjacent to them would require planning and preparation. And as we move to the lighter yellow, a little less concern, and then finally down to the green. We are not telling you that you shouldn't be concerned about something that occurs in one of the green boxes, but from a prioritization, it's a less of a threat because of the impact potential that it would have. Now, that box outside that's labeled black swan, that's an event that's never occurred before. But we know that school shootings are actually not black swans. They're the elephant. They're the concern that every parent has that could occur within our school. So there will be events that can happen that can come out of the blue and create a significant disruption within your school and within your area. But the concern that most parents have today is that shooter on campus. Now, you're more likely to be hit by a meteorite today than you are to be involved in a school shooting. But again, that's not an acceptable explanation to a parent who's concerned about their child and the protection elements that are required there. So take the risk, map them out, And this is, again, a good discussion with your faculty and staff to see where these risks come together and where you need to place emphasis. Now, those terms we define, as you see here, and the impact severity, something that's insignificant is there's no impact on people, property, or in this case, camp operations, or in your case, school operations. If you'll look down to the certainty, let's go to that highly probable, most likely to occur each year, high level of recorded incidents in the area or industry sector that's associated with it. So you've got specific areas that you need to think about, and now there's a definition of black swan listed here for you also. So you take these types of definitions to help you map on the hazard matrix that we had on the previous page. There's also another way to look at the types of exposures that you have, and that's to divide them between natural events that could occur or hazard or human-induced events. You'll see over on the left side, you've got things like a wildfire, a winter storm, a flash flood, or if you're in a coastal area, a hurricane exposure. The human-induced, you'll see a lot of events listed there that could become triggers associated where a person would be involved within. Now, when we think about these types of threats, let me give you some numbers and statistics as a reference area. The Red Cross states there are over 70,000 disasters annually in the United States. Now, not everyone's a tornado or an earthquake or a hurricane. The majority of fires, more people die from drowning in floods than in any other exposure. But those 70,000 events, almost 200 a day, don't include the 2 million episodes of workplace violence annually in the U.S. They don't include accidents that occur. They don't include communicable illness. So the commonality of this is much more than you might think, that it would be an event that would be more likely to occur that we need to think about. Again, the hazards and threats at your school, you want to make your own list. We've worked with schools in Hawaii where they actually have a volcano exposure. So obviously that's not going to be a problem as we think about Georgia and the exposures that we see here. Now the risk rankings, as those colors that we talked about earlier, you'll see here more definitions of those red, yellow, and green types of indications that you would think about and carry forward. But the beginning of any type of planning is to identify the vulnerabilities and threats, their likelihood of occurrence, and then make sure that your plans tell people how they should respond in the event that those should occur, and have monitoring to see if they are in process. Now, we talked at the very beginning with the update about the tragic shootings that have occurred recently, the bullying, the deaths, the suicides. Let's spend just a few minutes and talk a little bit more about violence in schools. That's an area that we're all exposed to, and I would like to remind you that your school is in fact a workplace. So we're concerned about school violence, but we're also concerned about the exposure that we have because we are in fact a workplace to come together. So are we safe? That was a question that we asked at the very beginning, and you look at there 7 deaths annually for every 10 million children in schools. That's an extremely low probability, as you see the percentage indicated there. However, if it's my child, that's certainly an unacceptable one. Now, the workplace violence statistics here are, and you see the numbers that are coming up, and they're dated a little because of the lag in the reporting aspect of it. There was a statistic that's not up here that's actually a little frightening when we think about it. The FBI has identified that there are 4 mass killings there are a mass killing of 4 people every 2 weeks in the United States. Let me say that again, since I didn't speak as clearly as I should have. The FBI has identified that every 2 weeks there's a mass shooting event where 4 people or more are killed in the United States. So when you think about that, that's every other week these events are starting to occur that we need to be thinking about and building our plans to address. If you look at over the decades, the list of killings in schools, and you start to see the uptick in recent years of how those numbers continue to grow, that's why you see parents being so concerned and focused with the shootings that occurred in Connecticut. These are Sandy Hook. These types of events are really a parent's worst nightmare, and you have to have the planning together. Now, the OSHA 2 million episodes of workplace violence annually, look at the comparison to from the National School Safety Center that we have 2.1 million bullies each year in America and 2.7 million victims from those bullies. Now, I find it interesting the comparison of the 2 million reported cases of workplace violence and the 2.1 million bullies annually in the United States. This is an area that it certainly has to become a concern. So we want you to focus here at the little thermometer to the right where it talks about the escalation. And everyone certainly responds when it rises to the level of death at the top, and that's certainly our largest concern. But looking back at behaviors of concern, identifying those at the very beginning so we can de-escalate, that we can help those individuals who have problems, that we can respond, makes a difference. This is why it becomes extremely important that we are familiar with what Tier 1 and Tier 2 behaviors are. What are the indicators that we should be looking at? So as we see that behavior start to escalate up to threats and then to physical injury and then unfortunately to death, we take action earlier in that process. And there's training and procedures for us to think about as we go through each of those areas. This is the impact, and this is the area where anonymous reporting could certainly be an indicator for us. So when we think about shootings, what's the characteristic here? They're predominantly male that come out. 98% are carried out by a single attacker. Columbine is the rare exception into that. But most people were involved in planning to think there. And more than likely, you're going to see this from people that you already know and are aware of, as opposed to the lone gunman that comes in that's unknown. Now, when you look at the school shooters versus internal than external, you again see the reinforcement here of it's primarily a male-related event. But look at that second red highlighted area. 75% of the shooters had felt bullied. So bullying becomes a key driver to identify as an early indicator of risk that we would certainly have a problem. Firestorm has an expert council with nationally recognized experts, and we have a retired Surgeon General from the United States, a former director of the Centers for Disease Control, military generals, supply chain experts, food safety, product recall. But one of our very first expert council members passed away this year. It was Dr. C. Everett Koop, the retired Surgeon General from the United States. And Dr. Koop felt that there was a direct link between bullying in schools and later workplace violence, and worked very strongly in those areas. We certainly remember Dr. Koop for his involvement with smoking and the changes that came in from there. But interestingly, Dr. Koop, as a child, had been bullied in school, and he knew about those impacts from his personal experience. When he was a small child in school, they called him Chicken Koop, and his nickname became Chick Koop. By the way, he kept that name through his whole life, and when I met Dr. Koop, he said, well, call me Chick Koop. And I said, Dr. Koop, I don't think I can call you that. I think I'd rather just call you Dr. Koop. But when you look at those impacts, these things can change individuals for their entire life. About halfway down the list on this page, you'll see a statistic. 2/3 had never been in trouble. So the first event that they're involved in is this school shooting that's occurred. So that's why these things become so very important, that you have a threat assessment team within your school and as you think about it. So as we go through and talk about these types of statistics, they're the ones that become the drivers. These are the ones that your parents are going to be concerned about as we go forward and discuss school shootings and the potential associated with them. So let's go back and think about the impact versus the certainty that these events would occur. As we think about them, where do school shootings really fall? Certainly they're in that catastrophic from an impact standpoint, but from a likelihood, they're actually falling more in that unlikely area. It is possible, but it's probably unlikely. So the reason to emphasize this with you in our call today is that an event that we talk about, the active shooter in a school, which is certainly one of our biggest concerns, is not that event that is going to be highly probable. It's not going to be probable. It is possible. It's probably more unlikely to occur, and it is clearly very rare. So just because an event is rare doesn't mean it shouldn't be a part of our planning and carrying forward of what we're going to do. Examples of this, and we'll talk about this more in our planning cycles, would be, think about if you had an active shooter at your school and you had students outside of the building. What is your strategy to help them at that point in time? You may well be better to move them away from the building instead of trying to bring them back in. During most of the day, in all of our schools, we have students outside the building at any given time with PE, with sports events, with other things that are occurring. So if your exercises don't include responding to an armed intruder who is outside of the school while you have students outside of the school, you're missing a key portion of the exposure that should be concerned. So plot the risk and threats that you've seen along this hazard threat matrix, and it will help you as you do your planning and prioritization. Again, having someone from the outside come in and validate your analysis would certainly provide additional support and credibility. So when you think about a crisis, what is it? It's an event that really hasn't been planned for. It's not been completely examined and cannot always be mitigated or controlled. Now, in many cases, we try to prevent events from occurring. You lock your building to keep people out that should not be involved there. But you can't always guarantee it. And when those bad things occur, it's not business as usual in your school. It's a completely different environment that you find yourself in, having to respond to everyone that's there. We all know that if a shooting was reported at a school, parents are going to come there, come immediately and overrun your campus. Do you have a reunification plan within your school? And are you prepared to how you deal with those types of issues as we go through in planning from this vulnerability and threat assessment? So we also, in our calls, want to talk a little bit about some case studies and give you some examples of what you can think about and work through. Today we're going to talk about particularly the experiences at Virginia Tech, the shootings that occurred a little over 6 years ago. And Virginia Tech called Firestorm to come in after the shootings to help them as they respond. This is a definitive example of workplace violence and how it occurred within that area. Now, if you haven't seen the Virginia Tech campus, it's absolutely beautiful in the rolling hills of Virginia. It looks very Ivy League. It's a gorgeous campus to look at and see, but it quickly transformed from this picture into the one you see on your screen now. 140 satellite trucks, 324 media outlets, 1,500 reporters descending on that campus. No one is prepared for that level of an onslaught that would occur, that number of people that were coming to a particular school and responding to be there. They were going up to students on campus and asking questions like, we know you're not coming back to school next fall. Why aren't you coming back? They went up to faculty and asked, what did you know? When did you know it? They went to the administration and asked, why didn't you go into lockdown? Why haven't you terminated the president of the school? Those were tremendous issues to be dealt with. But the media didn't stop there. There was a reporter who dressed as a Catholic priest who went into the hospital to try to interview the students who'd been shot. We had another reporter who went up to a family during the memorial service for their child and tried to conduct an interview. So loss of command and control of your campus is an event and an outcome in these types of areas. So we talked a few minutes ago about it not being business as usual. It's business as unusual. You can see how those areas would come together. No one wants to be in the position that Dr. Charles Steger, the president of Virginia Tech, of having to pick up the phone and call a parent and say, I'm sorry, your son or your daughter won't be coming home today. So the media were in the dorms, they were in the classrooms, they were literally everywhere on campus. So regaining control of that became an important element, and we'll talk a little bit about how that came out. These are the steps of the administration building and the experiences that we had there. So we had a physically intact campus, but highly traumatized. Networks spent a great deal of money covering this event, as you remember back. But I'd also like to remind you that this event occurred years ago before the heavy deluge of social media. Social media has changed this role significantly. Today, when there's an active shooter reported in an area, CNN is texting directly to students in those schools, and they would go on camera to do an interview. They're sending those texts without approval of the school, without approval of the parents, and going directly to the students while the shooter is still on campus. It is only a matter of time before we'll have some type of a wrongful death suit as a result of those types of activities. We had a newspaper in the Midwest while a shooting was going on, reporting where messages were coming from on campus and indicating, oh, well, this person's in the library and this person's in the cafeteria. Again, this area and loss of control of information could directly aid a shooter at that point in time. Now, as we think about these events, when Firestorm was asked to come, we left our business cards at home. We came there and were engaged to support the administration and staff in working through these areas. And we helped them with their 3 messages. And these are messages that you would want to write down and keep in case you find yourself in a situation where an event of this magnitude has occurred. Those 3 messages at Virginia Tech are, we will not be defined by this event. Second, we will invent the future. Third, we'll embrace the families. If you find yourself in a situation where there has been loss of things cannot happen again. By the way, you will not want to talk about the actual event. The authorities will be dealing with that. The police, the fire, and others will be discussing that, particularly if there are investigations going on. Those are areas that are not appropriate for you to talk about. And that third message is that you will embrace the families, and that's what our schools are their families and how we come together. So as you look at these types of things, one of the things that we always focus on in a disaster or crisis is that word metrics. How do you know if you did a good job? How do you know if there's going to be a difference in what's involved? At Virginia Tech, we identified at the time of the shootings that there were 12,838 offer letters out to high school seniors. And again, remember, the shootings occurred on April the 16th. The deadline for decision was May 1. So in that 2-week period, moms and dads were sitting around kitchen tables with sons and daughters talking about, will you be safe there? Should you maybe go to your second choice? Is there racial tension on that particular campus? So by targeting our messages to the high school seniors, to their parents, getting the alumni involved in in-home visits, instead of their historical conversion rate of 30%, we were able to obtain a 60% conversion rate. We doubled the conversion rate in the face of the worst episode of workplace violence in United States history. When you think about your school, if we have this type of a crisis that occurs, it will have an impact. It will be tragic. It will be difficult. But it will have an ongoing impact on your school and your enrollment for the rest of the year, for the next year. Your brand, your reputation, and your image are all on the line in these types of areas. So thinking about these responses and having them prepared so that you have plans in place, that you're identifying the threats and risks, that you're training your people that they know what to do, that you have your messaging in place become absolutely critical as we carry forward. Now, messages don't always have to be PR phrases, and generally we find that press releases are not the best medium to share those out. But I talked about loss of command and control at Virginia Tech, and let's talk a little bit about that. When we arrived, there were 1,500 reporters all over campus looking for stories, and they were in the classrooms, the administration buildings, and dorms. So we worked with the school and their sign shop and created the sign that you see up on the screen at this point in time. Notice to the media, we ask that you respect our grieving and recovery. Please no media beyond this point. For interview requests, call and the Virginia Tech community. By putting those signs on the doors to the dorm, the doors to the buildings, it empowered the students to ask the media to leave the dorm, to give them an area of safe harbor as you would come forward. Those become extremely important as you create. So not every message, not every plan has to be a slogan or a brand statement, but it does have to be one in which we share information and give that out to empower your people. Planning and controlling who has access, who is on your campus at any given time is extremely critical for you to know how you would operate. Now, we're going to talk in the future about plans and this detail of how versus what, but the beginning foundation is to focus on what are the vulnerabilities and threats that are obvious at our campus. You go and you do a security assessment of your site. You could certainly have the local police department. They would be glad to respond from the county or the city and help and take a look at that. Firestorm would be glad to work with you in those respects, but you've got to understand what are the physical limitations, and then what are the other threats that are not just security related that you're facing. How likely are they? How are you going to monitor those threats? And do you have plans in place for each one of those elements as you would go forward? So that's what we wanted you to understand today, the beginning point, the vulnerability threat assessment, looking at your physical site, speaking with your staff, your students, reviewing your documents, your records, your plans, your procedures, your policies, and looking at making sure that it's very, very clear how you're to do everything you're asking your group to do. And then the monitoring of those threats to see are they about to emerge and come together. So we covered that background today, and as we start to close today, I wanted to see if there were any questions that have come in. There is a toolbar to the right. If you have a question, you can use that to type it in, and we'll address it. And if we don't have questions directly today, we're going to try to reach out to everyone on our call and answer those. For those of you that we met in Macon, we're in the process of following up with those assessments and helping you with the answers to the questions that were generated from there. Now, we did offer, and we will continue to do so, if you would like to have a preparedness assessment of your school, Firestorm normally charges $2,500 for that assessment, but the cost of that assessment has been underwritten by the GSA, and you would be at no cost to your school. So if you'd like to have that type of an assessment, you can go again to our website. Let me back that back up. You can go to firestorm.com, contact us, mention the GISA, and that assessment will come and be given for your school. We do this in an interview format. It takes about 45 minutes to an hour to answer those questions, and then we would schedule the following week to give you back the report. It will probably be about 15 pages long with a narrative of where you are relative to standards and best practices, and in addition, it will then give you a numerical score as a percentage. So, Bill, as we move along, do we have any questions that have come in that we need to address?
We do have a request that you re-show the statistics from 1950 to present. Could you show that slide again?
Right. I will. We'll attempt to do that right now. So let's go back. Let's see. Was it? That's the internal. This one. Is this the slide?
Yes, that one there.
All right. So we'll show that slide back up. And we'll update this slide again at the end of this year, adding 2013 associated with it. But as you look at it, the number of upticks in the recent year and the number of shootings that we've already had this year make these numbers go up more. It's much more common now than what we have seen in the past as we go together. And then if you continue those on and look at this episode of bullying and the statistics around it, you'll certainly start to see this is why parents are so concerned that this is the exposure they think about the most. It is not the most common one. It is, though, however, the one that generates more question than anything else in that area. Our next webinar that's coming up is going to be entitled Next We Plan. We'll be going into more of the details around planning. It's scheduled for November the 19th. It will be from 10 to 11 a.m. on that day. All of the webinars for the Georgia Independent School Association have been recorded or will be recorded, and they'll be available on the firestorm.com website. So if you want to share the thoughts that we've been talking about with others on your staff, this will be a good opportunity to do so, and they can go there and watch it at their convenience as we go forward. This webinar will be posted a little bit later today, so that if you want to refer back to it and if you would like copies of the slides, please let us know and we will make arrangements to have those provided to you. So, Bill, if there are no other questions, have there been any others that we need to address?
No, but just an observation that some people have expressed an interest in the slides, and we'll be able to distribute those out to you. Just send us a note to firestorm.com, and we'll be glad to do that. You'll also find that GoToWebinar will send out a reminder, and you may respond to that reminder and request a copy of the slide deck.
So we'd like to thank everybody for spending some time with us today as we've talked about the vulnerabilities and threats that your school faces and the beginning point of developing plans that will make a difference to everyone there and help you through dealing with the exposures that you have. Next month, we're going to focus on the beginning of the planning process, and as we will continue to announce the series for the rest of the year. If you have other questions, we'll be seeing you at the event coming up in November, the annual meeting that you have scheduled, and look for us there. If you've got other issues that you'd like to talk about, feel free to reach out to Candy at the GISA, and she will certainly be a help. So we'll give you back your morning. Good luck, everyone. Have a great day, and we look forward to talking with you in the future. Goodbye.